So welcome back. The next session is called Greening the Internet, and it follows on from an important discussion we had last year about the complex relationship between the internet and the environment, something I first worked on for the International Institute for Sustainable Development more than a decade ago, and which is an increasingly important preoccupation for many people in the internet world. Climate change is obviously the environmental issue of the moment here because Britain is about to host COP26, the latest event to be described as the last chance saloon where climate is concerned. And the internet's growth and more particularly the increasing scope and scale of digitalization are growing contributors to energy consumption and so to climate change, but they also offer ways in which consumption in other sectors can be mitigated. This is also not only about climate. Pollution and resource depletion are also important issues of digital sustainability. The session is going to be chaired by Anna Yang, who's director of the Sustainability Accelerator at the Royal Institute for International Affairs at Chatham House. She's going to give an introduction setting the scene, particularly around the COP conference. Anna's experience before Chatham House on climate and sustainability has been at the International Finance Corporation, the Forest Stewardship Council in Brazil, and the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. And she'll be joined on her panel by Emma Fryer, who leads the data center program for technology sector the trade body Tech UK, represents the interests of operators to governments and other stakeholders through that, and also works in other contexts, including the European Commission. And the other panelist is Michael Ogier, who's a consultant based in Belgrade, editor, researcher, speaker, and advocate for ICT sustainability, working in the field of digital policy and infrastructure, internet governance, and media development. Anna, please go ahead and tell us about the state of play regarding COP26.
Well, thank you, David. I have prepared a very short slide with some very high-level key message that I would like to share with everybody. I have clicked share. Oh, here. Every time. So give me, Emma or Michael, give me a thumbs up that you can see it so that I make sure that I'm sharing. Okay, cool. So, okay, now how do I move slide? Moving forward, it's stuck here. I think for some reason, oh, there it is. It's just taking a while. I mean, in August this year, so we have two important timelines. We have in 10 days' time, the Conference of the Parties at Glasgow. And also in August, the IPCC, which is the scientific body that comes together that does research and analysis around the latest on climate change science, has released this report, which is the AR6. And there's some really important message that I wanted to share, and then that it sets the scene for the day. One is this certainty about no doubt on the attributions of the climate change and also the linkage to human influence. So it is anthropogenic, it's human driven, and we have extreme events happening. So, and the prediction is that these climate change trends are driving more extreme and more severe weather pattern. So hotter weathers, more precipitation, and we've seen it, we've lived through it, and it's just gonna basically get worse. And one thing that I wanna make sure that it's also come across, climate change is non-linear risk. It's a non-linear risk multiplier. So there are all sorts of that research is still moving in terms of how the different weather and now all the different environmental issues are interconnected. So, for example, the discussion how deforestation affects rainfall pattern that will also may lead to some kind of tipping point in the Arctics, and every half degree matters. So I'm not sure to what level of detail you'll be able to see this, but between 2 degrees and 1.5 degree means the survival of the coral reef. It means different the droughts and frequency of rainfall patterns. So if you want to sort of because we're now coming to Halloween, if you want to be scared, do read the report. If you don't want to, maybe wait for afterwards. And I think I think there is a positive message that comes out of the AR6, which is 1.5 degree is still possible. The thing is, right now, we definitely need more ambitious actions to avoid this temperature lock-in. Right now, the business as usual takes us to 3 degrees. And if we implement all the national pledged policies, we're not on pathway to 2.5 degree. And that basically, I will also talk about why this COP matters and what are the big ask for COP and what everybody needs to do. And so what I just talked about before is every bit matters. So decarbonization needs to take place across all sectors. Everything matters. And this is why the community of the internet also needs to work towards it. And every single sector, every action is necessary. And so 1.5 degree is still possible, but it's a very, very slow narrow pathway. And what also I want to come to also share with you is there is no pathway to 1.5 degree without regeneration or restoration of nature. So all this discussion about nature-based solution really matters. Conservation of forest, restoration, regeneration, regenerative agricultural practice, they all need to be deployed at scale and fast. So COP. And so why this COP matters is because every 5 years, I mean, the Conference of Parties meets every year. But so Paris was important because it sets this international architecture for sort of the world, right? States and non-state actors to say, well, this is what there is a framework within which everybody works. And then it sets also sort of key ambitious sort of what is the limits that we can achieve. So there was the 2 degrees, and then now everybody's aiming towards 1.5 degrees. So this year, for those of you who follow discussion on the news, this morning, The Guardian, BBC, we're talking about 1.5 degrees. How do we achieve 1.5 degrees? And so this COP is technically 5 years, so it should have been last year, but like a 5-year revision plan is when countries come up and they show almost like the report card, right? What they have committed and what they have delivered, but also at the same time, how they raise ambition. So for this Glasgow, there are 3 success measures that we need to watch. One is how do we increase the level of ambition through national determined contributions, those are the national commitments. But I also want to add that all the non-state actors, municipalities, companies, everybody should show up and demonstrate more ambition. We need to have more clarity in terms of how do we provide finance for the low carbon transition. There is this there's this $100 billion transition money. And then so developed country who bears more responsibility need to be able to demonstrate how they're going to provide the funding for the most vulnerable countries to transition. And finally, the technicalities of the Paris Agreement rulebook, right? Paris Agreement set us this high-level framework, but the details of specific, how do you do tracking, how do you do accountability, what are the tools, those are the things that need to be negotiated at Glasgow. So this is, we have collectively a big ask and task ahead of COP, and what I would want for this discussion today to happen is like, what can the internet community do to contribute to that? So I will stop sharing and I'll hand over to Emma.
Thanks very much indeed, Anna, and thanks very much for having me on this. So I look after the UK's data centre sector, sort of viewed by government now as the data infrastructure sector, and I provide a collective voice for UK operators in matters of policy, reputation and compliance, which I have to say keeps me pretty busy and puts me, I think, between a rock and a hard place most of my time. I think I've said that to Michael a few times already. We think that data centre are responsible for between 15 and 25% of the overall ICT sector energy consumption. According to the International Energy Agency, that represents about 1% of global electricity. I emphasise electricity, not energy, because the sector is electro-intensive. And actually, that's a big issue for us. We are very electro-intensive, but in a way, that's because we concentrate all this computing activity to where it can be done most efficiently, most reliably, most securely, in a resilient way. So that's what we're doing, and you can you can expect that to be electro-intensive. I think there's sometimes a sense that we present data infrastructure as doing nothing more than sort of enabling us to upload videos of ourselves teaching our dogs to tap dance. But data centers do underpin the economy. You know, the economy is now an internet economy, and the digital economy is not only the present but the future. So we do have a really important role in that. And I think, you know, we only have to look at how the internet enabled our move of many businesses and activities online over the last 18 months. And I read a thing, I think it was in a paper, I think it was in one of the scientific journals a couple of days ago, which said that a decade ago, it would have taken us 12 years to develop a vaccine. And we've developed 4 vaccines in 10 months. And that's because we had the compute power to do that. That's why, because we had the compute power. So I thought that was quite an interesting thing. Anyway, I think, though, we're left with some really difficult core problems for the sector. Obviously, we underpin a number of enabling technologies: smart grid, dematerialization, congestion management, autonomous vehicles, etc. But many of those technologies are data hungry. And also the general move to digitalization across economies, the movement of government services, the migration of on-premise IT, all that is creating an enormous increase in the volume of digital data that we have to manage, process, store, transmit, transact. So how do we accommodate this massive explosion in the digital data demand without a concomitant increase in energy demand and emissions from the sector itself? And that's what we're juggling with all the time. And I think there's 4 or 5 ways we have to do that. And I'm, you know, interested in talking further on any of them. Firstly, obviously, we have to optimize efficiency. But while we do that, we've got to keep a really, really close eye on rebound factors. Jevons paradox. You know, communications are price elastic. The cheaper you make something, the more we do it. The second thing I think we need to do, and I sense a real urgency, is we really need to improve transparency and awareness. I think some of our business models are problematic, although they're incredibly good at driving innovation. The freemium and advertorial business models that most consumers are able to access doesn't give them a price signal for the energy consumption that they don't see off the internet. And I did a quiz at my son's school, and a significant minority of children didn't think the internet used any energy, which really worried me. So that's the transparency piece. I think we have to massively accelerate not just the adoption, but the enabling of renewable generation. I think we've got a good story to tell here, because certainly the data infrastructure with its sort of characteristic high flat load could be an important player in facilitating additional, you know, renewable scale utility generation through PPAs, and also to actually play more of a prosumer part in a more distributed and dynamic grid. But there's a lot of ducks we've got to line up to make that happen. And then I think we need to target aspects of the sector that are lagging behind. The on-prem, legacy on-prem is a real problem. We don't know how much it is. We don't know how much has been migrated. We don't know how much is left there. That is where I would be targeting my attention. But also, and I know this was mentioned at the beginning by David, the embedded energy and the resource depletion, because, you know, we are using a lot of materials in this. So those are my challenges as I see them. I hope that gives you a flavour. That's why I'm busy.
Michael, over to you.
Because she always sets the scene so well. And for me, I actually don't really want to spend too much time on introductory words, because I'd much rather kind of discuss and debate, because especially whenever we're talking about digital infrastructure from relatively small climate, of course, there's a lot to be said there about whether or not it's enabling, whether or not it's exacerbating. It's quite complex. But for me, at least, and from the standpoint of the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance, for which I work with now, I like to make key cases for, not 3 key, rather like point out 3 key issues. The first that Emma already somewhat alluded to is seeing sustainability as holistic. So for instance, if we're just focusing on climate, that's great. However, it is only one very small piece of the puzzle, because sustainability issues, energy consumption and climate impact is just one of many, including the extensive supply chain, resource use, whether it be water, land, that's related to data centers, but also to many other things. So for instance, the idea that digital infrastructure is just data centers, that's obviously true too. And not that I'm trying to contradict anyone. I just mean that data centers are, again, just a small part of digital infrastructure. There's transportation networks, there's energy providers, there's software developers. All of this is part of the entire ecosystem, and they all use materials, they all use energy, they all use resources, they generate pollution. There's, I mean, if we think about embodied emissions, are we talking about, I mean, a lot of the, I think I've seen somewhere like 80% of embodied emissions are just in the production stage alone, not even in the use, consumption, recycling, or lack, etc., etc. So the point is that we need to see ICTs from a very holistic lens when we're talking about sustainability. This is especially relevant to data centers, but really beyond that as well. The second point that I want to make is that we absolutely have to make the business case for sustainability. This is something that SDIA pushes very hard. In other words, it implies that sustainable solutions are better for the people in the communities that digital technologies are meant to serve. Then we also need to make sure that they come up with that are meant to be sustainable, they need to themselves be viable, because if they're not, then they're never going to take off. On top of that, there's especially if you think about government purchasing, or you think about other kinds of procurement. Let's say you have two vendors coming to responding to a tender. One of them might give, let's say, a certain price for that tender, and I don't know what the statistics are necessarily, but I think it's safe to presume that typically the one with the lower price is often the one that may be preferred. But that lower price often necessarily doesn't take into account externalities, into account other things that a sustainable solution may actually include, potentially at a slightly higher price, but will actually be more sustainable in the long term. So a good example of this is that if you, is with a consumer product, if you have an inexpensive consumer product that's meant to not last, yeah, that might be cheaper than the version that is meant to last, but is a little bit more expensive. You don't have to then replace it as often. So obviously that has a lot of implications for environmental sustainability, but also financial sustainability. So the two actually go hand in hand. Lastly, this is my third point, and this is, to me, the most frustrating, because all of this is great, but we can't do any of this without political will. How do we generate political will? Everybody's like, oh, yeah, political will. We do it through collective action. If we are not voting with our wallets, voting with our through elections, if we're, of course, lucky enough to be in a place that elections matter, then we're not really going to move this issue at all. We, because it's so complex. It is so disheartening sometimes. I mean, COP26 is coming up, and we don't have to get too much into my own personal views on everything, but let's just say I'm deeply pessimistic about where we're going, what we need to get there. And even just to maybe throw in a little bit of contention, and as to something you said, Emma, about the vaccines, for instance, about being able to get there through the power of compute. I don't disagree at all with you, but there were two key things that were also fueling the need for the vaccines. One was political will. Nobody wants to stay inside longer than we already is, maybe except for like the key introverts among us. But number two, of course, is that there's tremendous gain to be made financially from developing the vaccines. I mean, I don't even know how many billions have been spent now just on the vaccine procurement. So, I'm not trying to get into, anything negative about vaccines. I just mean in the sense of underlying conditions that support it. We need to find those same conditions for digital technology.
Well, thank you, Emma and Michael. We have something like 25 minutes ahead of us for some, I mean, this conversation can go anywhere. so many things that I want to talk about or just like with you. But I'm just thinking, what is the best way? So maybe I'll start with a Q&A, and then we can also, I would also want it like us to ask each other questions, because I have so many questions that I want to ask you. But there was one specific, which is, what is the UK government doing about the environmental impact of blockchain, even or including cryptocurrency mining, minting, etc.? Can anybody address that question?
The answer is I can probably only answer the mining, and because there isn't really any that happens in the UK, it's not really, to my knowledge, it's not on the agenda. It's certainly not anything I've not had any interaction or any questions from government, and usually I'm the first person they ask for that kind of thing. So certainly in terms of crypto mining, it just really doesn't happen in the UK. The energy costs are too prohibitive. So it's not, for that reason, it's not really come onto the agenda. Interestingly, I've got a discussion with DCMS later this afternoon on exactly this, net zero and data centers. So if it comes up there, I'll let you know.
All right. So if you have questions, you have to put it on Q&A, because if you put it on chat, sorry. Also, Michael, go ahead.
No worries. Just to finish what you were saying, Anna, yeah, if anybody has questions, please ask. But I actually, a few words about crypto, because this is so big. It's such a headline-grabbing topic and whatnot. First of all, if anybody's looking for any kind of information on, especially electricity consumption from Bitcoin in particular, there's the University of Cambridge. Cambridge University Cambridge has some fantastic resources on it that you can actually see on their website. Let me look it up real quick. I'll put it in the chat after I finish speaking. But things to mention: Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, blockchain are all separate things. All Bitcoins are part of cryptocurrency. All cryptocurrencies are built on blockchains, but not all blockchains are crypto. But ultimately, all of these, you have to consider the climate impacts, the energy consumption, energy is powering them. Then you have to think about other things, such as the materials that are going into the mining rigs, production, transportation. You have to think about many other components, and especially waste. There's a lot of waste, because since it's so competitive to mine Bitcoin, for instance, you have to have the latest, greatest technology that can, that little tiny nanosecond matters whenever we're mining. So that the entire business model of cryptocurrency, for the most part, is built on non-sustainable methods. So that's the only thing I'll say about that.
Thank you, Michael. There's another question about learning technologies in higher education and the higher uptake on the last year lockdown. Do you have opinion on what does the sector? Does the sector understand its own sustainability and net zero issues? I mean, Emma, you talked about transparency, and then also that people just don't understand. Like, also what you said really shocked me. Like, kids don't think that internet is any kind of energy.
Yeah, I was really, and also there are things about the way we don't perceive the way our internet activity uses energy. So there is the internet activity, and then there's a lot of misconceptions around what uses energy and what doesn't. So if you want to save energy in terms of your mobile phone, the best way to save energy on your mobile phone is not to replace your mobile phone really frequently. That is the number one way. Don't keep buying the latest model, because I think, Michael, you were referring to this, I think something like 80% of the energy attributed to the life cycle of a mobile phone is in its manufacture. You need to sort of extend the life of that mobile phone, not always buy the latest model, perhaps. And that's something that isn't always understood, because actually in terms of charging, mobile phones are incredibly efficient because they've competed on efficiency because they want to keep going. So you can see where the competition has driven the market. But also they're highly sophisticated devices. I think we sometimes underestimate that. So yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions. That's quite a good example. And also people and how things use energy even in the home. That actually there's a concept that digital devices use a lot of energy in the home. And in fact, the biggest energy users in the home are fridges and freezers because they're always on. but people don't think about the background energy use of those connected devices, and also the biggest impact you can make if you were streaming video. If you wanted to change your impact in terms of streaming video, the biggest difference you make relates to the size of the device you're streaming on. And again, that's something that people think, oh, it's all the streaming is really terrible because you're downloading all the devices. No, it's the device. If you're watching on a massive TV, 90 times more energy will be used than if you're watching on a phone. So it's those kind of thing, and you're right. I'm always shocked by it, and I myself keep finding out things I didn't know. So how do we get that information out there in a simple way where people aren't going to misinterpret it, or somehow you end up with sort of perverse outcomes from that? I don't know. It's really, really tricky because it's really complicated.
Michael, do you want to come in on that?
I don't disagree at all with anything Emma's saying. And in fact, I do agree very much with her about the lack of, about the need to not buy phones, for instance, or do devices. I always say we have to fight against marketing departments. I'm so glad, Emma, that you mentioned the business models, because that's one of the biggest problems, is that if a business model is just intrinsically based on the idea that we will continue to buy new devices, make new hardware, despite the mountains of e-waste that exist, despite the lack of software support that is going into a phone that could easily last for 3, 4, 5 more years, then it's an uphill battle that we will not just be able to fix just through little things. It needs regulation. We really need market regulation when it comes to these issues from a sustainability point of view, because how if we're always being told you are not going to be good enough until you have the latest device, even though it's marginally better than the one that came out not even necessarily a year ago, but maybe 6 months ago or something, how can we win? Because that's what it is, and especially when that money is already going to multi-billion, if not trillion-dollar organizations that essentially have the same power as nation states. That's why, to me, collective action is the only real way that we're ever going to be able to overcome these issues. And the other thing that I want to say, and Emma, sorry, now we might be getting in. Again, I'm sure it's not a problem to disagree, but I want to highlight something, and that is that the entire concept of a carbon footprint came out of what's it called, a PR campaign that BP launched in the early 2000s to shift blame from fossil fuel producers to consumers. And so as much as I fully support ways that we can change our lifestyle and to be more sustainable, or to take part in those kinds of things, like how we stream, or how we buy devices, how we consume, ultimately that is a drop in the bucket, even on a collective scale, compared to fossil fuel emitters, to producers, to miners, etc., etc., etc. And so we need to give up our climate guilt, is what I'm trying to say, and is what it amounts to.
This is where I'm going to disagree with you. I'm not sorry, Emma. Did you want to come in?
Well, I would just say that it's everybody's problem. So I think it's. Yeah. So I would kind of say, no, don't give up your climate guilt. We need more climate guilt.
I'm of the same. I mean, I live with constant climate guilt. I work on climate change, and I eat beef. And I'm also of Chinese heritage, so I eat rice. Those are the 2 biggest methane contributor, if not also drive deforestation. So it's like a constant, like what gives me joy linked to like what gives me guilt. And I agree. I agree with you, Michael, and I agree with Emma. I was like, obviously, where the biggest bangs for the buck is at the company level, but it is everybody's responsibility. And Michael, your point about voting with your wallet or voting with this is how we demonstrate as also how we care, right? So I'm not going to buy a product from this company, or I'm not going to vote for this. I think we can do things through what we buy, through what we eat, how we move around. And I think for the whole discussion on the 1.5 degree is every bit matters. And so I sort of agree with you, but I do think that, I'm trying to be vegetarian. What I did was just like basically have red meat 2 or 3 times a year for very special occasions, and then it becomes really special. But I haven't managed to give it up yet. can I take this conversation, and Michael, you said about the business model and the finance, and I mean, both of you talked about it, and this is actually at the essence of what's going to happen after COP, right? One of the things around this COP is obviously there's all these net zero commitments, and this is all great. Next year and afterwards, all going to be around implementation and basically show me the money, right? How do you do this? And I don't think, and also you will know that, it's not going to be through traditional business as usual. It's not going to be through the business models as we know. You know, like by not incorporating the social environmental impacts and externalities. And so there are some pretty significant shifts that we will have to have at the societal level, at the economic level, like economic model level, which is not only pertinent to the internet sector. I just want to sort of, because I think that is actually the biggest battle that we all have to have. What do you guys think? Go ahead, please.
No, I was trying to say I'm talking a lot. Emma, please.
Oh, okay.
You start, because I was actually just typing something into the chat about the blockchain. Can I nip back quickly on the blockchain? And I'm going to let Michael come in on this. Just the blockchain. Sorry, not the blockchain, the crypto mining issue that you said, Mike. The one thing to keep an eye on there, yes, I mean, you know, we love to hate it, but what those guys are doing is they're pushing everything to the absolute limit in terms of efficiency. So they're testing cooling technologies that no commercial operator would be allowed to do because of they have SLAs with their customers that they have to meet. So it's worth keeping an eye on what those guys are doing, because they're pushing the front edge of what can and can't be done within the environment. So we need to definitely capture any learnings that come out of that. And as I said, it's not really something that's come up in the UK, but I think there's going to be some really useful learnings over the boundaries you can set in terms of what you can do in terms of efficiency within the technology, within the stack. So that's what I would be looking at myself. Sorry, back to you. And sorry, that was a complete segue, but I just wanted to mention it because and you're getting a drink now, Michael.
No, it's you know, sorry about the visual noise, but okay, so many things to say. So the first thing to say is that, Anna, don't feel bad, because I fly. I don't eat beef anymore, but I fly. And to put that into perspective, I mean, just to share this statistic with everyone, it's estimated that the emissions from the ICT sector are anywhere between 2 to 3%, which is on par with aviation. So yes, our individual footprints do matter. I don't want to sound like I'm saying, no, it doesn't matter. When I say climate guilt, I mean, don't despair for the way that things are. Don't be like, oh, you know, I turned the light on and therefore a forest in Borneo is being destroyed right now. You know, that's what I mean by climate guilt. Climate awareness and our you know, the compatibility, or rather the how much we rely on nature and our you know, impact on that. Of course, that's important. So sorry for not being more precise about what I meant by that in particular, but that was one thing I wanted to stress. Was in terms of moving past COP26 and into the implementation. That is where we as citizens are going to have a really long road ahead of us, because ultimately, I think anybody can agree that rhetoric is great, but what really matters is if we put our money where our mouths are. And especially given the energy crisis that's taking over in Europe, as well as everywhere in the world right now, especially given that fossil fuel use it seems to be on an upward trend, not on a downward trend anymore. Given that
is it just me, or Michael has a bit of instability?
You've got a bit Dalek-y, Michael.
I think it's just a bit.
But I can give you my guilt if I like. So I'm not really flying, but I do I do like a bath.
I think Michael, I think it's the dark lords of internet that are sort of trying to stop you from speaking. We lost you for about a minute.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me again?
You're just about coming back. Yeah, we're speculating that was the dark lords of internet stopping you from speaking.
Talking about things I shouldn't be talking about, huh?
So you were saying you were making your sorry, I just like in the last 30 seconds we all lost you. I don't know whether you want to repeat that.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
We can.
Oh, great. Yeah, I was saying clearly I'm talking about things that the powers that be don't want me to speak about. I'm teasing. So I was just saying that just to come back to your point, Anna, yes, with implementation in the years to come, this is where we really need to make sure that governments, that industry are putting their money where their mouths are when it comes to, you know, drawing down and whatnot. There is a huge fight ahead of us. And like I say, I try to be motivational, but I struggle myself because our entire economic system is unsustainable. Our entire societies are built in unsustainable ways. They're built on fossil fuels. They're not built on green energy. They're not built on recyclability or on ecological harmony. And so what we're essentially asking, not just the internet industry, but the entire world, is to say, okay, let's shift everything that we're doing in a way that it's now in harmony with nature. And that might be the biggest challenge that humanity has ever dealt with, ever since we've tried to figure out how to, you know, make it past living in caves or whatnot. And I'm not necessarily convinced that we'll be able to do it.
I mean, Michael, you touch on something so deeply sort of profound, which is something that we talk about it at the accelerator and we think about it, because ultimately it is what we live today is a manifestation of a value system that for me doesn't no longer actually serve me, and it's not sort of the future that I want to live in. And so, like you said, like you need to think about, completely rethink, you know, what are the fundamental universal values that we care about? It's not only sustainability, and for me, sustainability is a very, very broad way of catching everything beyond also energy and climate. Like you said, Michael, it's everything. But also it is about fairness with other human beings and also with other living beings. And so there is a fundamental, for me, that is sort of the basis and foundational issue that we sometimes don't talk about. And it feels really intractable. But at the same time, I also find it very powerful because this is something that I can do as an individual, because this is like me living my personal value every day. So it is about how do we translate that? And even if sort of the economic system and sort of some of the institutions doesn't quite translate that, but linking that to your value system really matters, because this is how I find hope every day. Sorry, I don't know why we kind of end up into this conversation, but I think this is actually, it's like all the intractable, you know, things that we have ahead of us is how do we manage all the different things that are coming at us, right? Because like the complexities around how do you green the internet, whether it's through decarbonization, or how do you reduce the resource use is one thing, but also like how do I deal with land use change, and then like how all sorts of, they all have different complexities, and it just feels an endless battle. And so the where I find hope is actually like, how does what I do every day link to my value system? And then what can I do to also connect to others? So anyway, this is sort of my, you know, when you catch me on a good day, I'm like that. When you catch me on a bad day, I want to lie under, you know, like under my duvet and cry. So just we're in the final last minutes, and maybe I touched on things because I want to sort of, what would you like to see if you had like one magic wand? What would you like to see sort of next year in terms of what is the ask? You yourself as an activist or researcher or however you want to call yourself, like what would you like to do and what you would like to see, that so that we can also harness more hope?
I have two principles I'd sort of like to see enacted. One is understanding the action consequence, which we don't always do. Sometimes we measure the wrong things. We do the wrong things for the right reasons. Does that make sense? And the other thing, so that any clarity in that magical clarity in knowing that if you did this, then the consequence would be that. But of course, our systems are far too complex to know that. And then the other one is just the best can be the enemy of the good. I do what you can do. Don't worry about being perfect. That would be my thought, I think.
Amazing.
I have many. Okay, since Emma did two, I'll do two. One,
go for many. I think we will need to put it out there so that we can feel inspired by each other and hopefully those who are listening to us.
I have a slide with all of my suggestions on it, but I'll give you two. One for end users and citizens. I would say think local. Although our problems, our challenges are global, they are interconnected. One of the easiest ways for you to do anything is to do it on your local level, whether it's within your community, finding a repair cafe, voting, taking part in public consultations, filling out freedom of information requests, that sort of thing. That's something you can do locally. And then for infrastructure operators, I would say there's kind of a two-parter. One is, actually, no, it's really just about don't underestimate the power of sustainable procurement and of course of collective bargaining. We need to embed sustainability into design. If you're an IT operator and you're not requesting that, from the people who provide the hardware that you rely on, we're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, and I think my one is really, just talking about, I've been working at climate change for donkey's years now, but I flip-flop between hope and pessimism. Every time these reports come out, I think, oh my God, and excuse my French, we're fucked. Please, but at the same time, I look at the amount, before Paris, like we didn't think that, we needed a global framework. Everybody was working towards the global, we got a global framework, and we even managed to get the 1.5 degree language in it. And then when I started doing the research back then, there was like 3 papers around the possibility of 1.5 degree. Now, 5 years down the line, the amount of knowledge that we have mobilized, and then also mobilize people to commit to 1.5, I find that also very inspiring. So it is about how, I agree with every, what you say, Emma, about, think about the action and consequence. Let's not, let perfect be the enemy of good, and that do local, and the design, starting from the design, at all of that, I think is what inspires me, and to think that, the possibility and the agency, right? Because it is about agency. When you feel that you look at climate change or the environmental issues, you feel this lack of agency. And the plea for me, maybe this is where my activist role comes in, is just like, I can do something about it, right? Even if it's just at the local level, or think about it or vote with it. Like, this is what I can do, and this is my bit of it. Anyway, I don't know. Emma, Michael, final wise words. Otherwise,
I'm just going to echo. I'm going to echo what you say. I think it's the only connect thing. Join the dots, and actually, government needs to join the dots as well. And we struggle hugely in data infrastructure because the dots are not joined across government. They're pulling up one thing, pushing at another, but somehow those aren't joined up. So everybody join the dots. As you said, the best is the enemy of the good. And I think everybody's problem, and let's not expect other people to sort this out for us. You only have to look around you and say, other people are not going to sort this out for us. This is our collective responsibility. And I think that would be my final thought on that.
Emma, you're brilliant, always, really. My final thought, my closing words, I always try to end on a positive note, despite my existential dread, everyone, believe it or not. But I always say that as the development and evolution of the internet demonstrates, collaboration is the only way forward. If the problem is that we don't have political will, how do we expect it to generate it? We're going to generate it through collective action. We're going to generate it together. So that's always how I like to end, with a bit of like, okay, now take to the streets and get our political will back,
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Emma and Michael, for this amazing conversation.